Well, it's a real challenge, Lance, and certainly we recognize that. And as a first-generation college student myself, who is still paying college loans and had a family that was very, very supportive, but also had to be very creative in terms of finding the financing for me to go, I personally understand how difficult it can be for our students and their families. And we also know that we can't make higher education so costly that individuals don't consider it accessible. It's critical, I think, for my children and my children's children. It's no longer going to be a question of if you go to college, it's going to be a question of where, if they want to have the kind of lifestyle that most people want to have. And so it's a real challenge for us when you consider the fact that our costs are continually going up, whether that be in the cost of utilities or insurance. Certainly employee benefits are very, very costly. Technology, whereas an individual who buys a personal computer might hold on to that for 4 or 5 years, when you are training students in high-tech programs, we aren't afforded that opportunity. I mean, we have to turn those computers over perhaps every 2 years, and so it becomes more costly than perhaps you would have in your own home. And you know, ASU Jonesboro is a good example. In 1991, 71% of ASU Jonesboro's funding came from the state of Arkansas. This year it's closer to 45%, and so it's been a significant drop. But we also realize that we cannot continue the escalating tuition. And if you look at where Arkansas has been historically, and if you look at where Arkansas has been in the last few years, we have not raised tuition at the same rate that many of our surrounding states or national states have. But when you also consider that our per capita income numbers also don't match up to those states, it is, although we may be lower, it's still just as significant of a challenge. But Lance, I think one of the things that we have to talk about, and I spend a great amount of time when I'm going to Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs and things of that nature, talking about the culture of higher education in Arkansas. Because we have such low college attainment rates historically, we still have not developed that culture of why it's so critically important, or an understanding that college is an investment. You know, too often I hear policymakers as well as individual families talk about the cost of a higher education. You know, I think we have to look at it more in terms of an investment. I use the story a lot that we'll hear folks complain about the cost of college education, but they'll go out and spend the same amount of money on a pickup truck, which 5 years later doesn't have nearly the value that college education is going to have. And I think the state, we have to continue to educate policymakers on that investment as well, because the statistics clearly show that individuals who have a college education are about half as likely to become unemployed as an individual who does not. An individual who has a college education is going to spend far less on health care costs than an individual who does not have a college education. An individual who has a college education is much less likely to be incarcerated than an individual who does have a college diploma. And you know, the figures show that the state pays almost 4 times more to incarcerate a single individual annually than we do to educate an individual annually at the higher education level. So if we could get more of those individuals educated, hopefully we would incarcerate fewer, and in the turn it's better for the state. And then it all obviously goes back to the economic development standpoint, and the average college graduate is going to make about $20,000 a year more than a high school graduate. Well, you multiply that out over thousands of students, and you think about the increase in the tax base and the disposable income those students will have, it's all good for the state. So, but we've got to do some work on explaining that and talking about it as an investment and not always looking at that cost. But at the same time that we're doing that, we've got to find ways to be more efficient. We've got to find ways to try to cut costs, and we've got to find ways to try to lessen the burden on the students. But at the same time, we also realize that when you have underprepared students, first-generation college students, and students who are coming into the pipeline with different challenges that maybe other states don't see, it takes a lot of human capital to help those students be successful, and that's costly. And at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that we don't reduce services, we don't water down the curriculum, and that everything's focused towards helping that individual be successful. And unfortunately, that takes a lot of money.